Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. With less than 1 week to go before FPL starts once again, I'm here with an updated draft ahead of game week 1. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's content, that'd be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's get looking at that draft. Right then, so starting off with the goalkeepers and the defence, but before we do, just a reminder that my mini league is now live ahead of game week 1. The code is above me. If you can't read it properly, it's RQ7NIR. And as always, any data I'm talking about today will be provided by Fantasy Football Hub. If you want 50% off, the link is, of course, in the description below. So then, let's start talking about the goalkeeper. And yes, at the moment, I've moved it up to a 5.5 million asset in David Raya. Now, beforehand, it was a 4.5. I'm still pretty tempted to go with a 4.5 keeper, but a lot of those options I'm feeling like aren't that secure right now. Dean Henderson was my previous favourite and probably still is my favourite of the 4.5s, especially because I'm looking at wildcarding around game week 6 and I like Palace's fixtures up until that point a lot more than any of the other 4.5 million options. Flecken, for instance, has a really poor run between now and game week 5. So Henderson I do like, but Palace look like they're going through a bit of turmoil at the moment. And of course, as you can see, I've got Munoz at the back. So doubling up defensively seems perhaps a little bit risky. And Raya has been convincing me more and more that he is a good pick going into game week 1. Not necessarily because I think he is a great option as 5.5 for value for money, but I think covering off the Arsenal backline is something that I'm more and more convinced is a good idea, even if I'm wildcarding in game week 6. The reason being is I've done some digging into Arsenal's away form last season against top 6 opposition. The thing that I kind of underestimated previous to now is that Arsenal's away form, even against the best clubs, still really, really strong for the expected goals conceded. So over the season, their expected goals conceded per 90 is 0.8. That is absolutely fantastic. But that doesn't change when away from home and against the best opposition. It was still 0.8 per 90 across the season for all of those games. So yes, they've got 3 tough away games in their first 5 against Villa, Spurs and Man City. But even in those games, their defence is absolutely elite and still has a decent chance of keeping it tight and keeping a clean sheet in those matches. So therefore, I do want some Arsenal coverage, if at all possible, in the back line, because I think that they're still going to keep a couple, if not a few, clean sheets in the opening 5 game weeks. Raya is the cheapest nailed option that I can get into that back line. And because I'm not that convinced in any of the 4.5 keepers right now, I quite like it as a boring alternative just to have him in and hopefully collect the clean sheet points. Obviously, I won't be getting any goal threat. It's not like it's a Gabriel or a Saliba, and that is a sacrifice that I'm making here. And it is a boring pick because he's realistically only ever going to get 2 points or 6 points. But what I'm backing and what I'm banking on here is that he'll get more clean sheets than not, especially in the opening few game weeks. And it does cover me off if Arsenal keep some clean sheets. It is boring though, so let me know in the comments below who your preferred 4.5 million keeper is and why. Moving into defence, and the one change that I've had in my starting 3 is I've removed Trent. Now that's nothing against Trent whatsoever. I just really needed to find some extra funds to move money elsewhere so I can upgrade the 4.5 keeper to Raya, for instance. I've made a couple of other upgrades in the midfield and forward lines as well. So in doing so, I've downgraded Trent to Porro. Now, Porro, his fixtures from game week 3 and 4 aren't great, but the opening 2 against Leicester away and Everton at home are fantastic. And I don't really want to pay too much attention to pre-season form, but he has looked very sharp. And he is reminding us how effective he can be going forward at that right-back position. He's not just playing a classic right-back. He is getting into the box, getting chances and shooting a lot. And whilst pre-season form shouldn't really be weighing on my mind too much, I have to admit that I am human, I am seeing it, and I'm thinking, okay, there's goals, there's assists in there for him, and maybe if we're lucky, a clean sheet or 2. It is a downgrade. I expect Trent to do very well in the opening 5 game weeks, but because I have other priorities and I wanted a bit more bench depth, it was one sacrifice that I've decided to make for the time being to free up that money and give myself an 8th attacker and give myself a much stronger keeper. So it is a sacrifice. I'm fully aware of that, but I still think Porro is going to do really well. Now, moving across to Gvardiol and Munoz, those are two attacking fullbacks. Gvardiol isn't classically thought of as attacking, but his data was very strong. 0.23 XGI per 90, very, very strong, especially for a Man City defender. They've got 3 good fixtures in the opening 5. That's from game week 2 to game week 4. And I do want a slice of a Man City defence. Now, they did find a way to concede very unfortunate goals last season, but the data was still very, very strong. And I think that they'll be one of the elite defences this season. There weren't many clean sheets in general in FPL last year, but the clean sheets that did come, more often than not, were from the elite clubs, the Arsenals, the Man Cities, the Liverpools in part as well. And I think if I can have a chunk of those, it just provides that little bit of safety for me. And hopefully all 3 of these options starting for me are attacking enough that I can complement hopeful clean sheets with plenty of attacking returns spread between the 3 of them. Speaking of the third one, Munoz is an option I am really, really keen on. 5 million, I think, is a great price point. He was unlucky not to get more attacking returns than he did last season. And I think the data doesn't really reflect how attacking he was. A number of occasions, as I mentioned in previous videos, he did pop up at the back post. The ball didn't quite reach him, so it doesn't register as an expected goal, expected anything. But all it took was the ball just to get across to him, and then it would have been a very, very high XG chance. So I think that he is a player that I expect to burst onto the scene in a big way this season. And I do like Palace's first 5 fixtures, even if they're going through a little bit of turmoil with transfer rumours flying for Gahey, Anderson. They might be a bit poorer, but I still expect them to be a good defence, good enough in the opening 5 game weeks at least. And also Munoz is so attacking that I do expect some goals, some assists from him. And I'm trying to bag myself a big return from each of these 3 defenders that I've picked so far. On the bench, I've gone with 2 4.0s. That might be considered risky, but Harwood Bellis is nailed. I would be very surprised if he didn't start 90-minute man for Saints this season. So at least that's a player that I can rely on to get minutes. And then Barco is a high upside pick at 4 million. He is a bit riskier for minutes, but I do expect him to start the season. And even if Brighton were to sign another left back now, I still think he'd be secure for the opening couple of game weeks at the very least. Either way, though, he's been on some set pieces. He's looked fantastic in pre-season and he is very highly rated. So I do expect him to have a very good breakout season. Maybe just a bit of a question mark long-term on the X minutes. But like I said, if I'm wildcarding fairly early, I'm not too worried about that. And I honestly don't expect to be starting him all that often anyway. So it is a gamble I'm willing to take because I think he's significantly underpriced at 4 million. So moving into the midfield and another couple of changes here, but before I go on to the changes, I'll quickly summarise the 3 players that have stayed in pretty much all of my drafts so far. Those 3 are Salah, Nkunku and Eze. Now, with Salah, he is someone that maybe not be locked into my final draft at the moment. I am worried that having this setup means that I'm spread a little thin across the board and there are other good assets that I'm missing out on. But I still think Salah, even if he's looked a little bit wider in pre-season, even if he hasn't been quite as threatening, I still think he's due a very, very good season. I still think it will be a 200-pointer. Liverpool's opening 5 fixtures are absolutely incredible. And especially if I'm going without Trent as a bit of a sacrifice, I do still want a piece of the Liverpool attack. And Salah is obviously going to be a very significant piece, even if he's playing slightly wider, which, by the way, I'm not too concerned about in pre-season. That happened to him last pre-season and he's still an absolutely fantastic asset. I still think that he will get plenty of chances to score goals. So for me, he's still in. The fixtures are still fantastic. And I think the way I'm playing it, he's likely going to be a captain in 2 of the opening 5 weeks. And that for me makes the premium price tag pretty okay to deal with for me. Moving on to Nkunku and Eze. Nkunku has obviously had a fantastic pre-season, very good on the underlying data when he's been fit, and previously in the Bundesliga was one of the elite strikers in European football. I think 6.5 is a significant underpricing. If he can stay fit, which by the way, he looks like he is going to be staying fit so far, I think that he is a player that I'd be very, very worried going without personally for me at the moment. I think he's got high upside, and as long as he stays fit, I think he is nailed into my side right now. Obviously, he could get injured. Any player could, and he probably is slightly more risky than others for getting injured. But so far in pre-season, he's been absolutely fine. He's been getting really good minutes and has looked absolutely razor sharp too. And looks like he fits into the Maresca system really, really well. On to Eze. Now, obviously, transfer rumours are circling a little bit, but I've not really seen anything concrete on him. He's on set pieces. He's on penalties. The underlying data for a 7 million asset is absolutely astounding. And as I've mentioned, Crystal Palace's fixtures are pretty good for the opening few game weeks. 0.4 XG per 90. I love it. I think Eze is locked into my side as long as nothing happens between now and game week 1 in terms of transfer rumours. Obviously, I have to keep my ear to the ground though, because anything can change in any given day. So Eze for me right now is absolutely nailed, but obviously the asterisk is if he stays at Palace. Now, moving on to the two 5.5 million midfielders that I've picked at the moment, and that is stretching it quite far. It is a bit of a gamble to not have an 8th attacker down at 4.5 or 5 million. I've pushed a little bit extra budget there because I think having a strong 8 in attack is going to work out really well for me. And as I'll explain in a moment's time, I think there's a rotation that I do like the look of between 2 of the midfielders and 1 of the attackers as well, 1 of the forwards. So to start off with Minte, I've been talking about him in some of the videos, and I do have a 5.5 million midfielder video coming out as well, but I really want to take the gamble on him. He's looked so good in pre-season. He comes really highly rated from the Eredivisie. Great underlying data last season as well. Obviously, take that with a pinch of salt because it's not Premier League. But in pre-season, he has looked electric. It looks like he fits the system that Hertzler is playing like a glove. And he's got so many left-backs on toast at the moment in pre-season. I really like the look of him. It is a gamble. They do have a lot of very talented wingers at Brighton. So all it takes is a couple of bad game weeks and you start to worry a little bit. But Brighton's fixtures after the first couple look really decent, or after the first 3 look really decent. We'll go on to that in a minute. And I just think he's such a high upside pick and differential that I'm just really tempted to go with him from the off and hope that he has the explosive breakout season that I kind of back him for so far. So he's one option that is a bit of a risk, but he is 1% owned. He's a differential, and I do kind of want to have a little bit of fun with that 7th and 8th attacker. So he is in for me at the moment, and I don't mind that opening game week against Everton. Smith Rowe is the other one in midfield. Now, it does mean that I could play 5 across the midfield a lot of the time. And honestly, even in this game week 1 draft, I could start him ahead of the 3rd forward that I'll come on to in a minute. But Man United away, it's an okay game. Obviously, Man United's defensive returns last season were really poor, so maybe I should be starting with him from the off. But if we disregard whether or not he's starting in game week 1, Smith Rowe has looked phenomenal already in a Fulham shirt. His underlying data previously at Arsenal when he's been fit has been very positive. We know he's got a very good eye for goal. He's already scored, I think, in both of the pre-season friendlies that he's represented Fulham for. And the X-Mins, I think, are going to be really high as long as he stays fit. But it looks like his fitness concerns are possibly isolated and very focused on one specific injury, which should be now a thing of the past. He did go and get that sorted previously whilst at Arsenal. And I think now we can hopefully rely on him to be a player that stays fit for a lot more of the season. He looks razor sharp in pre-season right now. He's playing in that very advanced central midfield role with Pereira dropping a bit deeper. I think he's going to get a lot of chances. I think the data is going to be great. And at 5.5 million, I do like the look of him a lot. And that is without even mentioning how good Fulham's fixtures are for the opening 5 game weeks. They are absolutely incredible. Again, I'll come on to them in a moment's time. But Man United is probably the toughest of the lot in the opening 5. And even that one is perfectly fine to be starting a Fulham asset against. It's an absolutely fine fixture. Man United defensively, as we've already discussed, not great last season. So overall, I really like the Smith Rowe pick. And I do want to include a Fulham asset if at all possible. So at this point, we've talked so much about 2 of these front 3 that I just really don't want to bore you. Haaland, very quick summary, has looked very good in pre-season. Obviously got the hat-trick against Chelsea, so that has scared people a little bit more into owning him. For what it's worth, I think regardless, he's still a great pick, but I don't want to bore you to death. You've probably got your own opinion on Haaland as it stands, whether you're Haaland in or Haaland out, because maybe he is a bit overpriced. He probably is overpriced, but I think the fixtures are still very good for the opening few, and I think for me, it's safer to just have him to start with, and then if I need to downgrade him and release funds, it's one transfer rather than needing to spend 2 or 3 transfers to get up to him by game week 2 against Ipswich at home, which will be a standout captaincy fixture for him. So I do like Haaland. I think he looks good in pre-season. He looks very, very sharp. So don't want to discuss that too much, but if you do, let me know in the comments below, and I can even do a video on it if you want to. Isak as well, I think he is almost an auto-select at this point. He will be owned by a lot of the very engaged managers. Great game week 1 fixture, arguably captainable. I've put my vice-captaincy armband on him at the moment. When we get closer to game week 1, I will have a bit more of a debate over whether it's Salah or Isak for the armband. But Isak's data is phenomenal, has great fixtures, and Newcastle look good in pre-season too, so that's not really a discussion. So finally, on to player number 3. That is Adam Armstrong as it stands, but this is the position that is probably most in flux right now. For what it's worth though, I do like Adam Armstrong as a pick. He should be absolutely nailed into that Southampton starting 11. He was on penalties last season and had a great goal and assist return in the Championship. It wasn't just the returns though, it was also the underlying data. 0.53 XG per 90 and 0.2 XA per 90 in the Championship is very, very positive. We obviously don't expect that to correlate with the Premier League. It will drop down a bit, but he is a focal point for Southampton and a bit of a talisman. So I like him a lot. He is only 5.5 million and has great fixtures at the start of the season. And I also like the rotation between him, Minte, and Smith Rowe for the opening 5 game weeks. So overall, I think he's a really positive pick, but I could easily move those 3 around and maybe go with a Rodrigo Muniz up top, or maybe even a João Pedro up top, and then possibly a Brereton Diaz in the midfield instead. So there's a lot of different ways to play this, but I do really like the rotation, and this also does give me a penalty taker up front in a very strong 8 rather than a 7 with a slightly weaker 4.5 million midfielder. So I will move on to the rotation now, because I think it really goes to show what can be done in the opening few game weeks if you have a combination of Brighton, Southampton and Fulham. So let's have a quick look at that rotation, and overall there's a lot of green there. I really like the look of it, and it means that I only have to bench one of the assets between Adam Armstrong, Smith Rowe and Minte every single week. So 2 out of 3 always have good fixtures here. Game week 1 is probably the trickiest one to call. Obviously, Everton away is a good fixture. Not ideal, but it's still decent. But then Newcastle and Man United, there's definitely a debate as to which one's the better one to start. Now, I think for me, I'm starting Armstrong at the moment because despite having a worse fixture, I think, that overall, I think Newcastle away is more difficult than Man United away. Adam Armstrong being on penalties and being a talismanic figure that we can rely on to get 80 plus minutes right now, I think is slightly more valuable than some of the question marks that we would have over Smith Rowe. He's probably not going to be on many set pieces, almost certainly not penalties. And again, we don't quite know just how many minutes he'll get in game week 1. Long term though, I think he is a great pick. Now moving on to game week 2, Nottingham Forest at home, Leicester at home, 2 very decent fixtures. And then Man United at home is, again, not a bad fixture whatsoever. But I think overall you probably play Armstrong and Smith Rowe there and bench Minte. Game week 3, Brentford away, Ipswich away, absolutely fine. And you can bench Minte again against Arsenal away, which is a tough fixture. Game week 4, you can bench Armstrong at home to Man United and play Smith Rowe against West Ham and Minte against Ipswich, which is a great fixture, of course. And then game week 5, you've got the home fixture for Southampton against Ipswich. You've got Nottingham Forest at home for Brighton, and you can bench Smith Rowe against Newcastle. So every week, there's a different combination of 2 that I really like the look of, and it does give me that depth that in a crisis, rather than needing a transfer, I could just play Minte against Man United, for instance, if there's an injury elsewhere, or I could just play an Armstrong against Man United in game week 4, for instance. So this gives me a much stronger bench, and it means that it could hopefully let me roll a transfer if there's a 1 game week injury or a rest or a rotation in the opening few game weeks. So just to quickly wrap up this video, I thought I'd chuck my draft team in to the Fantasy Football Hub Rate My Team tool at the moment, and I think overall it comes out pretty positive. I'm pretty happy with a 93% team rating. I know there will be higher ones out there, but I think that's partly because there are a few risks that maybe don't have the highest expected minutes at the moment in my starting lineup. So if those gambles pay off and the likes of Minte and Barco get good minutes in game week 1 and Smith Rowe also gets good minutes overall, which I think will happen, overall, I really like this draft, and I think it's maybe slightly underrating based on the expected minutes and some of the risks that I'm taking. I think it's really well balanced. Let me know what you get on Fantasy Football Hub as a team rating. I'm sure you can find one that is a higher percentage than me, and also what you think of some of the gambles that I'm taking, as well as that combination, that rotation in the midfield and the forward line in terms of Smith Rowe, Minte, and Armstrong as a 2 out of 3 every single week. Really interested to hear your thoughts on that as we approach game week 1, just a few days away now. If you've enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content as we do gear up for game week 1. I hope you've enjoyed today's video though, and I look forward to talking to you again very shortly.